Right. Rasem, I'm just preparing YouTube كمان. Rasem, I'm just preparing YouTube كمان. Sorry. All right, so we will be starting at 7:30 exactly in Qatar timing. So we'll just wait 2 more minutes, Rasem. Okay. Welcome on board for whoever is with us. We'll be starting in a minute. I hope some people are not having problems with the link. Okay.
It was easy for me, as long as it's Zoom. Zoom is always very convenient.
Yeah, and it's user-friendly as well. All right, so for those who just joined us, you can just check the chat for the live streaming and all the information that you need. I will just give a brief. Rasem, welcome on board, and welcome everyone to our 4th episode of AET. Please note that we will be live streaming on YouTube. The link is shared in our chat if you would like to share it with your friends and peers. For those of you who don't know Rasem, allow me to brief you a bit about him. Rasem is a Jordanian architect. He is currently based in Basel in Switzerland. He holds a Bachelor degree of Architecture from the University of Jordan and a Master of Architecture from Rice. He's actually a Fulbrighter. He was awarded many awards previously, and one of them is the AIA Henry Adams Certificate as an honor for his thesis that he's done in Rice University. For one of the projects that we will be discussing today, Rasem. Actually, we're very excited about that. He had the opportunity actually to work in many projects and around different countries, and we'll also discuss a few of your previous experiences in our structure, which you guys can check in our chat again. And Rasem is currently part of the Oppenheim design team. He is a design leader and architect with them. And he had the opportunity to work on the AIA Gulf Academy project in Aqaba. So Rasem, once again, welcome on board.
Hi, Diala. Thank you for having me tonight. It's a pleasure, actually, for me.
We are really happy to have you. So off then, we're going to start with our questionnaire. It's going to be short and simple. For those of you who don't know our structure, once again, please check our chat. All the information is shared with you in our chat box. We're going to leave room for Q&A at the end. So whichever questions you have, please just provide them there. So Rasem, I'm going to start with my first question, a very simple question, and share with us, please, your narrative about how you decided to become an architect.
So how I decided, actually, it's not a long story. I grew up in a house where my mom actually is an architect. Nice. So imagine like seeing every night an architect who works even before computer, working on the table, doing drawings, working on models. So I always like try to imitate her and try like to do the same. And by nature, I became after that very interested in details, like all details. And then when I had to decide at the end for university, there was no second choice. Architecture was always the first one. We never even had a discussion. I don't know. I can't really remember the details, but I don't think there was another option for me. Always like architecture or was the thing that I want to be.
That is actually very interesting for you to share a personal experience, Rasem. I mean, many architects share their visions differently, and that is very we appreciate that from your end.
Like what I remember, if I talk more about more personal issues, I remember like when you start seeing physical models at home, then you start thinking about architecture from that aspect, like looking at physical model and then starting to do your little things when you have some free time, or playing with those blocks and small trees. And for me that was a very interesting part of my experience to start, like, because you appreciate like seeing the space in this three-dimensional tangible aspect.
That is beautiful, Rasem. Thank you for sharing that experience. I mean, you as a child, I would imagine you as a child trying out building blocks and Legos just to imitate whatever you see in front of you. Wonderful. So after my next question, aside from your mother, who has been your role model, and how were you, I mean, let's talk about the architects, and how were you able to acknowledge your own identity and school of thought as an architect from his or her inspiration?
For me, I always think that for any architect, and probably most of the attendees agree, that the identity keep evolving while you are like growing up as an architect. So when I started in the undergrad, if I go back to all my inspirations and references, they were totally different than what I'm designing now and then what I'm following right now. Like if you ask me this question 10 years ago, I'll tell you that deconstruction, for example, is like my favorite school. All like architects who follow deconstruction. While after that, I became more into tectonics and everything related, like to make everything industrial, expose all your details. And now I'm more into simplicity, honesty, minimalism. Like if I, like my favorite architects, if I can say it like this now, I can say Peter Zumthor, John Pawson, David Chipperfield, everyone who just like doesn't flex muscles in architecture and just like try to celebrate and take the materials and lighting to their maximum potential.
That's an interesting revolution. I mean, from deconstruction to minimalism, that's actually a great evolvement in how one can advance their school of thought and become more in touch with your identity. That's
yes, because you start, after you become more mature, you know that architecture is beyond just being iconic or just impressing people. It has many other values. It's like when you stay in the space and you start feeling the space, then that's when you make this bond with the material and experience the light, the shadows, and the sounds of the space. That's what makes it very rich. It's not that iconic picture that people take and put on a magazine or something.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's all about experience and journey. So to my third question, you have a multicultural, rich architectural background while working in different cities, which I mentioned before, like for example, Symbiosis in Jordan, WW Oppenheim, or even SOM in the States, and currently working with Oppenheim's firm in Switzerland. How was this experience enriched? How did it enrich your architectural sensibility and vision, having said that you moved around different countries?
That's a very nice question. Actually, in all of them, now I'm able like to have different methodologies in how to start the project. So in each one, like there are like the multiple phases of the project. And I noticed that when you are like in a large scale company, then the quality of the evolution of the project always is lower than when you are a medium size or in a smaller size office. And that's why after leaving like the larger scale offices, my intention was like just to stay in a studio where like you can interact and you can make options and you can like experiment in architecture. Not only worry about having your deadline and things that you have to finish, or like just submissions.
That is great. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's if I want to talk about the advantages of small offices and like how the interaction, like you will have the opportunity to share also your knowledge with everyone in the studio. It's different than being in a large scale company with 300 people where like you only know your team that you're working with.
That is wonderful. I mean, you can change from different paradigms in different countries, different teamworks and engagements. That is absolutely true, because each office in each country has their different mentalities and I mean, working environment. So thank you for sharing once again, Rasem. For my fourth question, working currently in Oppenheim, you have worked on as well from Miami, in the Miami office with the AIA Gulf Academy and Clubhouse in Aqaba, Jordan, with your team. How were you able to share your national and cultural background as a Jordanian architect with your colleagues working on the project to better enhance the contextual, cultural, and environmental understanding of the site and the project as a whole?
Actually, I was lucky and I had the honor to work with a great team at Oppenheim on the AIA project. It was a responsibility by the European studio in Basel, like to work mainly on this project, not the Miami office. And actually, as a Jordanian, I was able like to use our Jordanian and even actually the whole Arabic like inspiration in a more modern way, but not to be like very cliche, like for example the use of mashrabiyya.
Yes.
And the use of perforated screens to protect you from the sun. Like we didn't want to use something that just looks traditional, like as the original idea. We like use it in a very contemporary way. So like it was adapting according to the use of space. So the perforations in the offices is totally different than perforations in the spa or in the golf teaching rooms. And I guess I wanted to stress on that during like the process of the project, like because usually like you take the inspiration of what's in Jordan, like as a tent or like as a mashrabiyya, and like use it in a very superficial way. We tried as much as possible to take it as much as possible into depth.
So Rasem, you had your own introduction for your team, and you shared your insights about some of our traditions and cultures in there. That is absolutely wonderful. I mean, having shared the Bashrabiyya and so on and so forth to your team is actually wonderful. So to my fifth question, you have worked during your studies as a Fulbrighter at Rice University on a brilliant project in Wadi Rum, which you entitled Wadi Rum Excavated Sanctuary. Which you took all your project under the ground. You made minimal subtractions of the natural ground to retain the aesthetics of the natural Wadi Rum scenery. So could you elaborate please more on this project? Because it's actually one of my favorites that you've done personally.
That was a very provocative project. Like people always say that I buried everyone underground. But it was actually an experimental project. The idea started like actually not in Wadi Rum. To tell you the story from the beginning, it was like when you are trying to find a debate for your thesis. I wanted to talk about subtraction in architecture, and
wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted to focus on this subject because nowadays most of the architects are just focusing on like flexing muscles and like trying to more have sophisticated tectonics in their buildings, while at the end, the space itself is very banal and doesn't have any different quality than other buildings around. So I wanted to flip this focus and like focus on the inside, and whatever the outside is, it doesn't matter. It's more about to flip the sentence like form follows function and make it like subtraction follows function. And then during the research of the size, I was like, what if I took Wadi Rum, where you have like this amazing land, that's empty desert that's surrounded with the magical mountains, and I subtract the ground because we really want to protect this horizon of mountains. And then your expansion horizontally doesn't matter. It's like the ants' colony nest. You just subtract what you need, and your circulation won't be very conventional. You just subtract your narrow or wide corridors just according to the function that you need. And that was like the story. How did the debate started?
That is absolutely, I mean, eye-opening, because for us architects, we always, as you said, we always aim to bring in our most aesthetical form and introduce it into a context where it doesn't fit. So having something actually buried underground is not killing people. On the contrary, your project actually, it brought life into the space, and it allowed people to actually explore the beauty of Wadi Rum from a different perspective. Thank you for sharing. For those of you who don't know the project, I just shared it in the chat. I urge you to have a look at it. So Rasem, we've asked the first 5 questions, and often I just want you to actually share your thoughts about our first pick and tick, which is the quote. So share with us one of your favorite quotes. I know you're not one of the, you don't favor quotes, but let's see what you come up with.
I will share actually 2. One is that I'm against. It's the one by Philip Johnson, that architect's job these days is just to make beautiful architecture. I'm totally against that. And I'll share one that's just a life quote, that always have high expectations in your achievement, but low expectations in people.
Wow, that's nice. That's nice. I mean, that's one architectural and one personal. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Rasem. So to our second section of the interview, it's pandemic versus urban influence. And by that, I would like to ask you, what are your main ideologies and thoughts about the impact of COVID-19, which is unprecedented and unexpected, on architecture in general?
Everyone in the media are talking about the disadvantages of globalization, and that it was like had a very bad influence in making the COVID like that fast and like spreading. While I guess after COVID, we are becoming more globalized. Like, could you imagine that we are talking together, you in Qatar and now, and I'm in Switzerland now on an interview? I couldn't imagine that before COVID. Even all the softwares like Skype and Zoom, they exist before, but we never had the chance to use them that much. The same thing is in architecture. Like now in the office, in my office, for example, we have the chance to talk with other consultants that we couldn't work in the past with, because we know that we can talk with them virtually, while this wasn't an option before.
I agree. And how did it affect your career by that sense?
I could, like a lot of clients, as you might imagine, and a lot of contractors now or developers like are stepping away of making like new decisions in our new projects. And what I'm expecting, like that the next 6 months will be very quiet, because whoever is working now is working on something old, but now I'm curious to know what's going to happen in the next year or the next 6 months. But that like could be also challenging to be for architects or interior designer to go out of this box, or just waiting the client to come with a project. Maybe it's like a new opportunity to make your like initiative and start doing new things, or like collaborate on new things like virtually. And that's the advantage that I was talking about before, that now we can work with everyone around the world. We don't need like just to work in the bubble around us.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Rasem. I mean, I saw the positive stuff in COVID, and I absolutely agree with you. And I have actually another question. So COVID, it has encouraged so many architects around the world to come up with solutions to promote public health, as you know, and precautionary measures in architecture, or they even actually designed many projects that can enhance the architectural module to adapt to future public health emergencies. So what, in your opinion, is the optimum solution to deal with future pandemics or future public health emergencies?
First, I will talk about distancing. I'm one of those people who just think that distancing could have protected us from all what's happening right now. It's not the mask. It's not only the disinfecting and the sanitizers. Like what I expect and I hope at the same time that all the rules that now we have in restaurants, in malls, in offices of the distancing will change. Like we always go with the minimum, and you will remember what I'm talking about when you see like all the tiny places open back again, and then you will see that if you apply the new distancing rules, they don't work anymore. Like especially here in Europe, like where I'm living, like half of the old town has like very tiny places, and you can imagine that they don't work after the pandemic.
I mean, that's saddening to hear that for sure, if we're going to apply distancing precautions, some small businesses, as you were saying, or even small restaurants or cafes or whatever the business is, they will unfortunately lose their jobs. So after my last question in this segment, do you think that architectural firms will be able to incorporate permanent WFH, which is working from home strategies in the long term post COVID-19?
This is a nice question because COVID-19 proved that you can do 99 of your job at home. It's not only for architecture. And actually, the funny story is that some now in the office, after going back to the office, we are doing some meetings by Zoom, like
Sure.
even each one working on his floor, because you can listen if it's not important for you to be like in the meeting right now, you can just work while listening to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And that one of the advantages that keeps going back again to my point is like now you have no limits. You can talk with everyone in any country if you want like a specific consultant, a lighting consultant, for example, you can just talk with him on Zoom and he will be your main consultant. You don't need like to be just like restricted with the people around you.
Absolutely, Rasem. I agree with you. I mean, I've been getting tons of messages on LinkedIn for people who are just offering their services just online. I mean, that's impressive. And I agree with you. So from here, I'm just going to give a small interlude with, again, our pick and tick. And now I would like you, Rasem, to share with us an advice. Advice for future generations or for future youth, actually, for the youth of tomorrow.
My advice is if you always have a goal like that you want to reach, don't put the goal based on the people around you. Always like pick your idol like in a bigger circle.
Wonderful.
And I will say that mostly to young students who are studying now in the universities, especially like young architects, who like always like try to design or make their projects just to compared with their colleagues around them. Well, it's not so correct. I guess you're always like should higher your expectations.
I fully agree because if you're actually affected by your peers, that's when you lose your own identity. I absolutely agree. So after our last segment, in this segment, we're just going to have 2 more questions on future developments. So you are the founder of Pixel, which is a creative studio that specializes in visualizing unbuilt architecture interiors or landscapes and details. So how do you envision the future of 3D renderings moving forward?
What I envision is like the 3D rendering should go away a little bit of just being a medium to impress people. It should be more a tool to deliver the message and the experience of the design. That's why now I'm stepping away of doing like still images. I'm more into like short movies, or like things that delivers the message of the experience, where you enter the space, not only see a flat image, a flat 2D image.
Absolutely. I mean, that could be actually developed now through all the programs that we are benefiting from, especially in a virtual world. I mean, I fully agree. So I would just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions, please list them in the Q&A, because we're off to our last question. Rasem, I'm back to you. Do you think that there would be a shift in career development and demand in the architectural profession in the future for us architects?
Yes, I always think there's like a better future coming, because things are changing, and architects like are now developing things that makes them more efficient in work, but more creative in the design and options, and that could give like a positive influence to our career.
Wonderful. Actually, I do envision a change and a slight change, or perhaps the name might change for us architects in the future. Let's see.
And yeah, if I want to add something, like if you notice, architects now are like thinking more out of the box in most of the countries. Like if you think about architecture in the 90s or in the 80s, every city has its own identity, and all the architects are trying just to be very attached to this identity. Now, the idea of being more global or more contemporary, you still can have your own identity, but with more openness to the world.
Wonderful, wonderful, Rasem. So now to our last pick and tick and our last interlude. I would expect you to reflect on an image that I will be sharing with you, and allow me to share the following. So this is the image that I'm sharing, and it's actually related to one of the projects you've worked on. What are your thoughts?
The first thought that I got is more like underground tunnels. That's the first thing that comes in my mind. Yeah.
Well, actually,
I see a section. More like a section of the ants' colony nest underground. But now, like when I see the mountains, it looks like a city. But if I read this as a razor diagram, that's the first thing that comes into my mind.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. It's actually the city of Derinkuyu in Turkey. And this is actually a city that's sunk underground. So I thought I'd share it because it's related to one of your projects, and it's wonderful to have such insights and relatable items that happened back in the past. So now I'm just gonna take two questions from our Q&A. For our first question, we have Umayma asking, she would love to know your thoughts about the post-COVID home design, where the home becomes a box of options in terms of it becoming multi-functional now. So what is the biggest design change you think will mark the post-COVID home, considering the situation will happen again?
Well, I can talk about my personal experience. Like now I started to appreciate like your care of designing your home, because the office and your working area is a very important part of your place. So you don't only need to care about your kitchen, bathroom, or bedroom only. You have to really give like a lot of care to the place where you work, like have enough lighting, maybe have a nice view sometimes, and I expect everyone in the future, when you select your apartment or you design your house, is to give like a very good attention to this point.
Super. So it's becoming more multifunctional. You're having more spaces inscribed within your home. But what do you think is the biggest design change? I mean, this is, I think, what she meant. So the biggest design change that will allow multifunctional spaces to become a box of options.
I guess to have an open and free plan. So probably if you are locked at home, you don't want to like be going from room and feel more locked inside a very tiny room. So I guess if I want to design my house again, I'll try to minimize the walls as much as possible and have it more like an open space.
Wonderful. Actually, that's a new thought to add. So we're going back to basics and we're going back to modernity and modernism. Wonderful, Rasem. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it allows modularity, it allows flexibility, and it allows dynamic changes of your space. So our second question is, what tools or skills should architects now learn or build to be relevant in the market?
There's no one tool that you have to learn. You always like have to create your own tool, like use the tool that you need that helps you the best to project your ideas. So I'm against to take it the other way around. Like you have to learn this and this and this. You have to know what you need and what the tool that helps you the most to present your ideas.
That is absolutely.
It's like colors. It's like colors. Like if we make a metaphor and each tool is a color, I just take the color that helps me the most in my drawing.
Wonderful. I mean, that's a lovely metaphor because each person is different to interpret his or her ideas in their own way and their own identity. So one could use a 3D rendering and another one could use
like sometimes if you're making a concept and you really want to make a very strong statement, probably you don't need any of those tools. Probably a very strong collage or razor drawing could help you like to convince and like really make it clear what's your statement. And sometimes you need another sophisticated software like 3ds Max or Lumion to make like a very refined animation to convince a developer. So it's different.
Well, thank you so much, Rasem, for sharing. I mean, I agreed with most of the things that you've said, and you've entertained us, I mean, incredibly tonight. Thank you guys for being with us tonight, and we hope you have a lovely weekend because your weekend starts now. We are so sorry to take from your time, but we hope to see you, I mean, again, personally and not virtually. And for our audience, thank you for joining us. Today was simple, short, and sweet, and see you next week. With
it's my pleasure, Diala. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, once again, and have a good night.
Bye-bye.